Hello everyone, welcome back to a new video. Most people believe the chaos we're living through is random economic collapse, political rage, cities spiraling into crime and emptiness. But what if I told you this isn't chaos at all? What if every breakdown you're witnessing right now is the final stage of a game that was designed centuries ago? A game built on blood, money, and invisible control. And what if that game is finally eating itself alive? You feel it, don't you? The sense that something fundamental is breaking. Not just markets, not just politics, something deeper, something structural. No one talks about this, but once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will change how you see the world you're living in. There's a manuscript, not widely circulated, written by a historian who spent 40 years tracing financial flows across continents. His name doesn't matter. What matters is what he found. He called it the Empire Game. And according to the notes, every empire in history follows the same three-stage pattern: expansion, extraction, collapse. But here's the twist. The last empire never actually ended. It just learned to hide. Think about the world we live in. The British Empire formally dissolved, colonial flags came down, independence was declared, but the infrastructure, the offshore islands, the banking laws, the trade routes, too, the legal loopholes carved into former colonies, they stayed and they evolved. Read this carefully. What used to be done with warships is now done with wire transfers. What used to require military occupation now requires only a shell company and a lawyer in the Cayman Islands. The empire didn't die, it went underground. It became financial, invisible, untouchable, and it's still running. Let me show you how. Imagine a kilogram of cocaine produced in the mountains of Colombia. It moves through Venezuela, shipped to the Caribbean, distributed to Europe, Asia, North America, Australia. Millions of dollars change hands. But here's the question no one asks. Where does the money go? Not into duffel bags, not into mattresses, into the system. According to the manuscript, the entire global drug trade worth over $500 billion annually requires three things to function: production, distribution, and financial laundering. The first two are visible. The third is where the empire lives: offshore hubs, tax havens. Former British territories in the Caribbean, Panama, Singapore, Hong Kong, the British Virgin Islands. These places were never accidents. They were designed, engineered over centuries to serve one purpose: move money without questions. A cartel doesn't just need muscle, it needs accountants. It needs bankers, it needs legal structures so complex that no single government can untangle them. And those structures, they were built by the same empire that once controlled a quarter of the Earth's surface. This is where it changes, because the money doesn't stay in the Caribbean. It doesn't stay offshore, it flows back into the first world, into real estate in Vancouver, luxury apartments in Sydney, condos in Miami, mansions in London. The wealth extracted from violence, addiction, and corruption in the developing world gets cleaned, rebranded, and invested into the economies of the most civilized nations on Earth, and no one stops it. Why? Because the empire evolved. It's no longer about controlling territory. It's so asymmetric. I mean, it misses the point totally. You know, is Vladimir Putin likely to be really deterred, much less traumatized, by the prospect of, you know, some of his officials being punished? I don't think so. What we've got here is essentially something incredibly fundamental to the security of Europe, and possibly beyond Europe, something more dangerous than anything we've encountered since Perestroika. So, in the first place, what has to be said loud and clear is that Russia was a party, you know, some of his officials being punished. I don't think so. What we've got here is essentially something incredibly fundamental to the security of Europe, and possibly beyond Europe, something more dangerous than anything we've encountered since Perestroika. So, in the first place, what has to be said loud and clear is that Russia was a party, you know, some of his officials being punished. I don't think so. The real game is being played by a network of financial elites who inherited the infrastructure of the old empire and turned it into something far more efficient. No soldiers, no governors, just laws, lawyers, offshore accounts, and silence. The manuscript describes it like this: the empire became a ghost. It lost its body but kept its nervous system. And that nervous system is finance. Here's the pattern. Step 1. A poor country produces something valuable. Drugs, minerals, timber, oil. Step 2. Local elites extract that value using violence or corruption. Step 3. The profits are funneled through offshore hubs that exist in legal grey zones territories that were once colonies, still using laws written in London. Step 4, the money re-enters the first world as clean investment capital. The cycle repeats. And it's not just drugs, it's arms, it's human trafficking, it's illegal mining, it's fraud, it's embezzlement. Trillions of dollars moving through the same channels every year. And the nations that benefit the most, the ones that scream the loudest about law and order, they're the ones hosting the money. But here's the twist. This system doesn't just move money, it changes people. Let's talk about what happens to a society when too much wealth flows in without being earned. According to the notes, over-financialization creates a specific kind of psychological rot. When a nation's economy becomes based on managing other people's money instead of producing value, something breaks inside the culture. Work becomes optional for the elite. Laziness becomes status. Arrogance becomes identity. You see it everywhere now. Cities where no one can afford to live because foreign money has turned housing into an investment vehicle. Entire neighborhoods owned by shell companies, governments that can't or won't stop it because the economy depends on the inflow. A generation priced out of ownership. A middle class hollowing out, wealth concentrating at the top while everyone else works harder for less. This isn't failure. This is the system working exactly as designed. The empire doesn't need colonies anymore. It doesn't need to occupy your land. It just needs to occupy your markets, your real estate, your legal system. And once it does, your own country starts serving its interests instead of yours. But here's the darker part. It's not just economic, it's moral. Read this carefully. When a society becomes wealthy through extraction and laundering instead of creation, it begins to lose its ethical center. The manuscript calls this the vice economy effect. A nation that profits from other people's suffering eventually becomes comfortable with suffering. Drugs? Fine, as long as they're sold somewhere else. Corruption? Fine, as long as the money comes here. Exploitation? Fine, as long as we're not the ones being exploited. Empathy dies. Solidarity dies. What replaces it is a cold, transactional view of the world. Everything has a price. Everyone can be bought. Morality becomes a burden, a weakness, something for the naive. You see it in the culture now, the obsession with luxury, the worship of wealth without asking where it came from, the acceptance of inequality as natural, the belief that if you're rich, you must be smart, and if you're poor, you must deserve it. This is the psychological endgame of the empire system, a society that cannibalizes its own soul in exchange for comfort, and it doesn't last. Because here's the thing about empires, they always collapse, not because they're defeated, but because they defeat themselves. The manuscript describes it as the success trap. When a system becomes so efficient at extracting wealth that it creates massive inequality, it begins to generate internal conflict. The elite becomes so dominant, so removed from the reality of ordinary life, that they lose the ability to govern. They stop seeing the people as citizens and start seeing them as resources. Sound familiar? Think about the last 10 years, the rage, the populism, the sense that the system is rigged, the feeling that no matter how hard you work, you'll never catch up, the suspicion that the people at the top are playing a different game with different rules. That's not paranoia, that's clarity. You're watching the empire eat itself. The financial system that was built to extract wealth from the rest of the world is now extracting wealth from its own population, and people are starting to notice. But here's the twist. The system can't stop because stopping would mean collapse. So it accelerates more debt, more speculation, more financialization, more wealth concentration, more inequality, more rage. It returns, it repeats, it refuses to end until it does. Let me tell you what the manuscript says about the final stage. When an empire becomes purely financial, it loses the ability to create. It can only extract. And when there's nothing left to extract, it turns on itself. We're there now. Look at the signs. Entire industries financialized, housing as speculation, education as debt, healthcare as profit extraction, even relationships turned into markets, swipe left, swipe right, rate, review, optimize. Everything becomes a transaction, and transactions don't build civilizations, they hollow them out. This is where the reset comes in. Most people think reset means collapse, chaos, Mad Max, but that's not what the manuscript describes. A reset isn't destruction, it's transition. The old game ends, a new game begins, and we're living in the gap between them. The Empire game was always going to end, not because it was evil, though it was, but because it was unsustainable. You can't build a civilization on extraction forever. Eventually you run out of things to extract, or people to exploit, or trust to burn. And when that happens, the system doesn't explode, it just stops working. You're seeing it now. Institutions losing legitimacy, governments unable to govern, experts no one believes, media no one trusts, economic theories that don't match reality. I sense that the people in charge have no idea what they're doing, because they don't. They were trained to manage the old game. But the old game is over, and no one knows what comes next. Here's what this means for you. You were born into the final stage of a system that was designed before you existed. A system built on invisible empire, offshore laundering, and financial extraction. You were told to play the game. Get educated, get a job, buy a house, build wealth. But the game is rigged, and it's ending. It's so asymmetric. I mean, it misses the point totally. You know, is Vladimir Putin likely to be really deterred, much less traumatized by the prospect of, you know, some of his officials being punished? I don't think so. What we've got here is essentially something incredibly fundamental to the security of Europe and possibly beyond Europe, something more dangerous than anything we've encountered since perestroika. So, in the first place, what has to be said loud and clear is that Russia was a party, because the game isn't designed for you to win, it's designed for wealth to flow upward, always, and it will keep flowing until there's nothing left to take. But here's the thing, you don't have to wait for permission to step out of it. This changes how you see yourself. It explains your restlessness. It explains why success feels hollow, why wealth feels empty, why the people at the top seem miserable despite having everything, because they're winning a game that destroys the player. The manuscript ends with a question: what is success if it leads to collapse? And the answer is simple. True success isn't wealth, it's relationships, it's purpose, it's meaning, it's building something that lasts beyond you. But the Empire game doesn't reward that. It rewards extraction, ruthlessness, short-term dominance, and nations play it anyway. Because if they don't, they fall behind. It's like doping in the Olympics. Everyone knows it's destructive, but if your competitors are doing it, you have no choice. So the game continues until it can't, and then it resets. You don't need to escape the world. You don't need to run to the woods. You don't need to pretend the system doesn't exist. You just need to stop letting it define you, because the reset isn't something that happens to you. It's something that happens through you. When enough people stop playing the old game, the new one begins. Not in violence, not in revolution, but in a quiet refusal. A refusal to believe that money is the only measure of worth, that extraction is the only way to survive, that the game they built is the only game there is. You don't need to erase the past, you need to finish it, not in reality, but in your mind. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, share this, and stay aware. The empire is ending, but you don't have to end with it.